Thank you everyone for joining us today. I think we're going to get started. So if you are willing and interested, if you'd like to put into the chat where you're tuning in from today. For example, I'm tuning in from Portland, Oregon, and I want to welcome you all. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mia Burke, and I'm program manager with Hanford Challenge. Hanford Challenge, if you're not familiar, is a nonprofit based in Seattle that advocates for a safe and effective cleanup of the Hanford nuclear site. And the most important thing we do and what makes us unique is our support of workers on the front lines of cleanup. This is the 39th webinar of our Nuclear Waste Scholar Series. If you're new to the series, we started it to inspire action and involvement with Hanford Cleanup by inviting speakers to share groundbreaking scholarship, art, research, and experience working with nuclear waste. We have almost all of our previous presentations uploaded to our YouTube channel, so be sure to check those out if you are curious. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Brahim El-Guabli. Brahim is an associate professor of Arabic Studies and Comparative Literature at Williams College and is currently an associate professor of Comparative Thought and Literature at Johns Hopkins University. He is the author of the award-winning book Moroccan Other Archives: History and Citizenship After State Violence, and of the recently published book Desert Imaginations: A History of Saharanism and Its Radical Consequences, which is what he'll be talking about today. Just as a heads up, if you can't stick around for the whole presentation, feel free to leave. We will be recording the presentation and we'll share a link of the recording with everyone that registered. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brahim. I will pass it now to you to talk about your work.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Liz. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very honored and privileged to be with you today to talk about my work on deserts and desert imaginations, which definitely dovetails with the mission of Hanford, but also the history that you guys are trying to work through and hopefully resolve, if not now, but in the future. So today I'm going to talk about my book, Desert Imaginations. But through my discussion of the book, I will be mainly focused on experimentation. I will give an overview of the book, of the main concept that drives it, and then I'll talk a little bit about different chapters, and I will zoom in on the experimentation aspect, which is relevant to nuclear colonialism and its legacies, and how deserts are transformed into sacrifice zones, not just in the United States but globally. Uh, I'm sure a lot of people probably have seen at least one of these photos. The one of Oppenheimer, the very sensational movie that received a lot of applause when it was released in 2023. And it was about the history of the making of the first atomic bomb in the United States. And a lot of the movie actually happens in New Mexico, but we don't really see where it happens. We don't see the space. We don't see the desert. We don't see the landscape. Most of it happens in a lab. So the movie is about something that was really central to arid lands, both in terms of the outsourcing of uranium and in terms of experimentation that happened. But the movie itself was mainly focused on labs and these discussions between scientists, thus invisibilizing the space. The other one is from Burning Man Festival. And it was also the same year. Revelers were excited to spend a very hot and dry week in Nevada, but unfortunately, it rained like crazy, and people started wondering if it actually rained in the desert. And people were bogged down. And I think this image is actually a very strong counter imagination to what a desert is like and what happens in a desert, contrary to how we imagine them. So the question then that I start with is, are deserts misunderstood? Because if we think about deserts, they are like between 30 and 33% of the area of the earth. And but at the same time, I think globally, generally, we all hold certain ideas about deserts as being places where we can do whatever we want, probably as spaces that are dead and empty, that are spaces that need to be transformed, spaces where you can probably go to seek solitude, places where nothing happens, and so on and so forth. Just this afternoon, I ran into a very nice person who was very happy to share a piece of news that happened to be about my hometown. And the person said, it's in the middle of nowhere. And then they had to say, well, there is actually 400,000 people living in my hometown, so it's not the middle of nowhere. I can't provide much context because some people might know who I'm talking about. But the idea is when you see a desert on the map, it doesn't matter whether it's inhabited or not. There is a set of ideas and imaginations that are deployed to make sense of it. And that set of ideas and imagination is something that I decided to call Saharanism as the concept that drives this book and the analysis that I provide in it. So since deserts are global, there are hot and cold deserts. They are in the Americas as they are in Africa and Asia, in Australia, and in Siberia and other places. I just want to make sure that we understand that Sahaраnism is not about one location. It's not about one nation. It's not about one culture. It's not about a specific language. It's about something that is global or globalizable. It's about an imagination that is created and deployed and that is imbued and imbibed and retained through a variety of media, a variety of texts, a variety of films, and ways of thinking about space. Uh, so, uh, as a result of Saharanism, deserts as such are imagined as Mike Heffernan claims that things that are not conceivable in ordinary places are conceivable and possible to think about and do and act upon in deserts. And Saharism as such is not something that was produced yesterday, I claim. It's actually the outcome of a long history of treasure hunting, racialization, adventurous enterprises, and imperialistic intervention in desert spaces. And it has legitimized the transformation of arid lands into loci for both material and immaterial extraction. And it acts as a blueprint for projects whose existence and survival require that deserts remain fearsome, threatening, and dead in the public imagination. Uh, why is it important to think through Saharism? This, for me, I've taught several classes about deserts, and I've heard people speak about deserts. I grew up in an arid area. It's not like a 100% desert as we imagine it, but an area that does not receive enough rain to qualify as an ordinary space. But it's also in literature considered a desert or an arid land. And through my interaction with deserts in different media, the way they are depicted, represented, the way they are talked about. I feel that there was something missing in the way scholarship and the way people understand these spaces. And I think what was missing is a vocabulary to talk about the way we think about deserts. If you ask 20 people about what's the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about desert or when you hear the word desert, they will probably say emptiness, remoteness, solitude, death, danger, oil, and so on and so forth. So there are these cliches that maybe not everyone in these 20 people, of course, would respond the same way, but you will find that a majority of these people will share a certain assumption about a place that they may not even have visited or they may never probably have encountered, but they have this imagination that they internalized. So I claim that understanding Saharism as the ideational apparatus undergirding and justifying the myriad ways and enterprises that have taken place in deserts shifts attention from these desert-focused undertakings to their intellectual origins in Saharism. So the work that we need to do is not simply to understand or to pay attention to how the desert is or deserts are internalized, but actually to understand the lineage, the ideas, the process that has led us to have these ideas, and to provide a vocabulary that would allow us to actually make sense of these things. That's why Saharism is important, is that it it names something that exists, that people are aware of, at least in scholarship, that it exists. There is a lot of scholarship about emptiness, a lot of people critiquing the way deserts are treated. But up to now, we did not have the language to do that. And once we have the language to do it, we can name it. Once you name something, it becomes clear. And once it's clear, it's possible to take action either to curb it or to create more awareness about it. And I would say that a lot of the literature about nuclearism and nuclear colonization is actually like that. In the 50s and the 1950s and the 1960s, knowledge about radiation and about the nefarious effects of the leaks that happened, of the tailings, of the process of excavation of uranium was very minimal. It was only until the 1980s and the 1990s that the knowledge became much more widespread and that a lot of action has been undertaken and books have been written about the legacies of this stuff. And Saharism, as you hear, there is the root of Sahara in that. But for me, the Sahara is not the main objective of Saharism. But because Sahara or Sahara is the largest desert in the world, and it does evoke a lot of ideas. It has a history that is intertwined with religion, with the Bible, with the Torah, with the Quran, with different things that it's actually a very nice word to use in this. But in Arabic, I actually like the notion of khala, which indicates wilderness or emptiness in order. And then I develop the neologism istikhla to be the Arabic translation for the term. And then in English, we can, of course, use desertism. Particularly because when I developed the concept, the notion of deserting something, it's not just desertifying, but you're also deserting ethics, you're deserting morality, you're deserting your obligations towards humans and non-human subjects when you're treating deserts the way I will be describing them. And of course, when you think about the history of deserts, the Romans described them, or at least the part that they had access to, as solitudines. It was a war, it was a barrier that separated the world of civilization or the city from the world of barbarians who had to be fended off. And Romans built limits in North Africa or Tamazgha. They built limits to separate these two worlds, the worlds of Roman civilization from the world of the barbarians. The Greeks used the term Ethiopian to talk about the people of the desert who were darker in their skin, and Ethiopian in Greek means the burnt face or burnt faces. And this marks one of the earliest racializations that actually mark what I call this notion of Saharism. So racialization of both space and people is built into notions of barbarianism in the desert, but also in terms of facial features of people who are darker and live in the desert. And of course, it's very difficult to know whether the Greeks were talking about like people in today North Africa, or whether they were talking about Egyptians, or whether they were talking of people about people further south of Egypt. Whatever it is, there is this connection between color, race, and space. And of course, very close to us, starting in the 19th century, it's the notion of terra nihilus, or no man's land, that was used by the French to diminish the importance of deserts and their people, but also to create modes of ownership that opened deserts for exploration and various forms of extraction. And the last thing that's really important here, and it's something that's widely popular, and for a lot of reasons we do not really take the time to critique, it's the UNESCO and its project of Arid Lands Program, which was started in 1951 and has had a very nefarious legacy about the way we think about desert spaces. So historically, there is this very long fascination with deserts. Like you would see if you look up desert on the internet and the Sahara, you would see Mansa Musa, and you would see him like wearing this golden, clothing, his horses with gold, his slaves and his caravan full of gold, and this associated the desert, the Sahara, with gold. To the extent that so Mansa Musa made a trip to Egypt in the 12th century, the 13th century, and it was said that he brought so much gold from the Sudan that he that the price of gold went down in Egypt. He spent so much gold that the 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 price of gold plummeted during that period. And the story of the king of Mali, Mansa Musa, got taken by Europeans. And it was written into narratives that then inspire what's called the Catalan Atlas. These two, the Crics, a father and a son, made this map for the King of Aragon. And if you see here in the middle of the Sahara, they put gold, and they wrote that the Negro King of Mali had so much gold that he did not even know what to do with it. And for a long time, the story of gold in the Sahara was associated with the city of Timbuktu. And we don't have time to talk about how many people tried to reach Timbuktu and how many people died and the kinds of narratives that spurred. However, the story of Timbuktu would become a tragic part of this fascination with the desert and this enterprise of Saharanism that would accommodate extraction, discovery, mapping, and creation of map until a young French citizen named René Caillé in 1826 was able to go into the city of Timbuktu and debunk the myth of gold and richness and all of that. Of course, there is also popular literature. I don't know how many people read. I've read a lot of Tintin et Milo, Tintin et Milo. These are very popular cartoons made in the 1950s. And as you can see, the desert is reduced, or the Sahara is reduced to sand dunes, to bandits, to theft, mirages, and all sorts of sabotage, but also to oil. الذهب, so this says الذهب الأسود or l'or noir, the black gold. So the desert is this place that either you encounter danger, you encounter adventure, you encounter wealth. And that's how like not just the Sahara is imagined, but also the Arabian Peninsula and other places. And there is also the spiritual aspect of the Sahara, and I think the colonial period. And this is I have a whole chapter on what I call spiritual Saharanism, and the work of the church and the army in the Sahara, and how this gentleman Cardinal Lavigerie, who was at some point the Archbishop of Algiers and the Primate of Africa, as well as uh, uh, he had also like a position of oversight over Jerusalem from Algiers. So a larger than life personality. And his whole idea was that the Sahara is the enemy and that it's the land of barbarians, and that the only way to get it out of the way of French domination is by evangelizing everyone. And he literally imagined this, like this conflict between Christianity and Islam. And his way into it is the practice of slavery that he attributes to Islam. And he created what's called the White Army. After him came this gentleman who is also very well known, is Charles de Foucault. And a lot of people, actually globally, people know Charles de Foucault because he wrote a lot. And he started Les Petits Frères de Jésus, the little brothers of Jesus. And he struck this really fascinating partnership with Le Général Lapérine. And this photo is actually from an academy, a military academy in France, and it commemorates their life because both of them lived and died in Algeria, and they symbolize literally the unity between church and the army in its fight for colonization. And like the way I think I write here is that I say that Lavigerie and Foucault used their prominent positions to solidify spiritual Saharanism into a household presence in the 19th and 20th centuries. So if you read in anything about the church in Africa or in solitude in the desert, you are deeply embedded in the legacy of Saharanism. There is also a sexual aspect to Saharanism. And if you've watched, for example, Westworld, it happens in a theme park. It looks like a desert. And what's really fascinating about Westworld is that it's an announcement of artificial intelligence, of cyborgs, and these very smart robots that they're smart to perform some things, but they are not as smart as human beings because they are programmed. They can receive human actions from the guests, but they cannot retaliate until something goes wrong and they start to remember. And then they start to take revenge on humans. But what's really interesting about Westworld for me is that it's a place that has no laws, that has no ethics, has no morality. As a guest, you pay, you come in, you can have sex as much time as you want, you can be intimate, you can drink as much as you want, there is even one scene in which they say that the people of this town really know how to do all of these things. And it's a fascinating invitation to make deserts into moral deserts, or places where ethics and legality doesn't work. And Westworld is really just, I think, a very late rendering of something that actually happened. Because when in the 19th century, like Oscar Wilde, André Gide used to go to the Sahara to practice pedophilia. And there is an Australian writer who was asked in the 2000s. He was like, "So what do you think about Gide's engagement in pedophilia in Algeria?" And his response was like, "It was normal at the time, and nobody took issue with it." This is an invitation to think about Saharanism also as this ideological apparatus that allows people to desert ethics, to desert morality, and to see in deserts these places where what we consider civilization does not really apply. And of course, there is a long literature about a category of women. These women were called Oladnail, and French writers and thinkers produced so much rubbish about them as dancers and prostitutes, and they created a whole field that became what they call desert pornography. Because it traveled. American journalists came from DC and they wrote a lot of stories about them, British journalists. And even into the 50s, they got so dehumanized to the extent that they attribute prostitution to culture instead of thinking about like how did the tourism industry, the French tourism industry, actually turn something that was a cultural practice of dance into an economy of sex in the desert. So this is where I'm going to stop a little bit more to because this is the most relevant part. And I have a chapter called Experimental Saharanism, and I just dedicate it to the various ways in which deserts have been thought about as these places where you can experiment with anything. So I talked about ethics and morality, but now I'm going to talk about real experimentation in terms of scientific discovery, and particularly experimentation with gadgets, with weapons, and other forms of invention. And Trevor Paglen, an American geographer, rates that the geography of distant deserts is part of a larger and deeper black world. And I like this idea of the black world because for him, he asserts that this black world is not solely about the secret communications, air traffic, and clandestine carriers that connected the different sites, which all happen to be mainly in deserts, but also results from, quote, the power to create these geographies, to create places where anything can happen, and to do it with impunity. And they build on that to say that experimental Saharanism thrives in the secret geography of isolated and inaccessible desert spaces. Ensured of their impunity, proponents of experimental Saharanism have no limits to what they may do in deserts. Much like other atomic states, France made a dark geography of the Sahara for its nuclear, ballistic, and chemical testing between 1957 and 1978. So for Paglin, deserts as a black world is not just about using this black world to do what you want. There is another layer, which is the layer of impunity. Once you have impunity, you can do whatever you want. People usually wonder, for example, why do we have serial killers? Why are there serial killers? Well, you kill only once. Once you kill once, you can kill 100 times. And that's because the moral threshold of that is once you cross that line, there is nothing that can stop you. And I think the idea also with experimenting is that once you remove the consequences from the way, and you know and you're insured impunity, then you can do whatever you want. And that's really where Saharanism kicks in. Saharanism provides a rationale for things to be done and done in ways that guarantee the perpetrators impunity. And this notion of dark geography is really important. And nuclear colonization is definitely an important aspect of this dark geography. And nuclear colonization builds on the production of emptiness. And deserts, of course, act as spaces where you can test nuclear weapons, particularly. Why are nuclear weapons important to talk about? Because they are the most destructive type of weapons humans have invented. Not just that they can kill millions of people at once, but also because their legacies continue into the future. They do not only colonize and exterminate the present, they colonize the future. If you can think about radiation lasting for tens of thousands of years, then you can see why they are a matter of concern. So when France wanted to develop its nuclear weapons and they were looking for a site to test them, they had several ideas. They thought about one of their islands in the Mediterranean, but then the city council got wind of those plans and they just aborted it. They thought about the Pacific, but then they were like, the Pacific is too far, we cannot do that. And then they were like, well, how about the Sahara? And of course, we come back to the desert. And once you think about the desert, you have to justify the decision. They already made the decision, but they need to justify it so that it looks like it's a matter of deliberation. So this man, his name is General Charles Ayri. He made two reconnaissance visits to the Sahara, and he writes, we encountered several officers who served as chiefs of posts in the Saharan affairs. In general, they were excellent officers with a great conscience and very devoted to their tasks of civilian administration before all else. However, they appeared to us as very specialized in a way that's more than narrow in their Saharan problems, and also although they strove to promote a modern Sahara, they were attached to old methods. And he goes on and on to say that these people were out of step with atomic age. Atomic age requires new people, new ways of thinking about space. And after that visit, his report was that the only thing we saw was some vipers and some scorpions. And it was the absolute desert where there is nothing. And in French, they had invented this notion of le désert dans le désert, the desert within the desert. And they blocked about 108,000 kilometers in the Sahara, which is the equivalent of 45,000 miles to conduct these experiments. And and literally, the whole justification was that this was empty, there was nothing happening there, there was no life, etc. And this actually evokes statements made by the United States too. Some I'm quoting from Ward Churchill, who writes, a set of experiences confirming in the minds of US planners and strategists the need for vast tracts of remote and worthless territory for use in, end quote, experimentation of nuclear weapons. Even South Hall, an Australian historian, wrote about the Woomera area, one quote, one of the greatest stretches of uninhabited wastelands on earth created by God specifically for rockets, a magnitude of emptiness. Another quote really wasn't much good for anything but gunnery practice. You could bomb it into oblivion and never notice the difference. This is about the American Southwest. This is a quote from an official report. So you can see that it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the Sahara, whether we're talking about the American Southwest, whether we're talking about Woomera in Southwest Australia, this idea, the production of the emptiness of the desert runs across the narrative for the preparation of the terrain and the space of the desert for various forms of experimentation. And here I'm just focusing on the nuclear one. And in the UN, when France was preparing to detonate its bomb in Algeria, this is from 1959, there was this very strong debate. Actually, it was between Morocco and France. And the ambassador of Morocco, Benhima, who was trained in France, was facing the French delegate at the UN. His name is Jules Mock, who was a socialist. And Mr. Mock had to come up with all these justifications for why the Sahara was chosen for for experimentation. And this is a statement that he made. Experts agree in stating that to all intents and purposes, there is no wind towards the southwest or north which could carry anything 1,000 kilometers from the Saharan site. The sands from Africa, which sometimes are found in southern Europe, do not come from the area chosen, but from the African deserts, far from it. And there is another quote here that I won't read, but if you look at these maps, Mr. Mock like presented these maps at the UN, arguing that if you look at the popular density, like this is from the Soviet Union, where the Soviets did their experiments, this is the United States, and this is the Sahara. And the idea for him, if you look like it's a very deliberate project, right? You see that there is a lot of writing here and a lot of writing here indicating the existence of more cities and places and inhabited areas. Whereas here, there is more empty space, indicating that the Sahara is safer for nuclear tests. And he actually says that the American explosions in Nevada were much more dangerous than whatever France did in the Sahara. However, here the issue here is not what's more dangerous and what's not, but actually the fact that you are treating a space and subjecting as a living space to the most destructive weapon humanity invented. So this question was never addressed. It was just like, what was safe to do, how to do it, how the wind is going to work, because the idea, because the emptiness has already been produced, and the terms of the debate are not about like the categorical refusal of testing, but rather about what makes the test safe. And he says that both the air and the ground is safe. I'm like, you cannot control radiation. Radiation is something that's like, it goes up. You cannot control where it goes. So there is this fiction of safety, the fiction of nuclear safety. And again, I come to the notion of Saharanism. That is like, once you think it, once you make the desert as a recipient of this thing, then you think about the justification for it. So this map was made in 1959. This one was made in a few days after the experiments in 1960. but it was leaked. It was published in 2013. And you can see that Gilles Mock was actually lying. That what was there was a dissemination of nuclear residues, and the fallout actually reached places as far as Nigeria and Ghana and other places. And in the book, I talk about a report that was established by the British and the Ghanaian authorities that I think after 4 or 5 days, the nuclear fallout reached Ghana. Uh, so the other notion that's really important here is to think about deserts as sacrifice zones, the desert as a sacrifice zone produced by Saharanism. And here I won't read this quote, but it's about this part of the United States near Salt Lake City and Goshut people. And it just shows you how these areas are populated with, facilities that whose main goal is to test things, store things that are harmful, and this leader says that this whole area has been deemed a waste zone by the federal government. And what's fascinating about sacrifice zones is that they're places that are sacrificed in or you sacrifice one area in order to create value somewhere else. So you would say we are ready to sacrifice this portion of uranium producing areas in order to build a weapon that's going to help us defend national security, or you decide to sacrifice an area to illnesses. For example, like the area of Baton Rouge. People have written a lot about this as a cancer belt in order to create value in New York, because you don't want these industries, very pollutant industries, to be in New York. So deserts as sacrifice zones, as areas that are sacrificed in order to create value and prosperity and jobs and other things. But what complicates this notion here is that all of this is happening in indigenous lands that were not ceded and that are actually under, treaty agreements between indigenous people and the federal government. So experimentation in deserts takes different forms. I don't have time to talk about all of them. There is building walls, climate engineering, mega projects, and also remapping. One example here is Neom City that is being developed in Saudi Arabia by Mohammed bin Salman. It's going to be a wall, just like this long 70 kilometers, one line, and it's going to be a smart city. It's going to cost almost $1 trillion. And what's interesting here, thinking about Saharanism, is this connection between authoritarianism, architecture, and Saharanism that I'd be very happy to talk about later. There have been projects to bring seas into deserts. Like here you see, like there was a plan in the 19th century to bring the Mediterranean into the Sahara to climate engineer the climate. But then the problem is, like, they don't think about like all the depressions that they're going to do, the flies that's going to create, the ways it's going to change not just the climate but also the life of the people. And luckily these projects failed, but they are informed by Sahara. Same thing in the Kalahari Desert, creating a man-made lake, and in order to soften the climate and all of that. And then there is this idea of actually creating a Saharan state that France tried to create after the independence of Algeria, but it failed also. They wanted to excise the Sahara, make it into a state, because they discovered a lot of oil and they just started to think about solar energy and all of that. And at the time when Algeria was about to become independent, so they came up with this idea of l'Organisation commune des régions sahariennes. It failed, but it tells you something about this possibility of remapping deserts. And all of this, I'm finishing here. The How does Saharanism travel? That's an important idea. Deserts are spaces of collaboration, spaces of enterprises, spaces of exchanges of ideas and expertise between different scientists, research groups, and all of that. And Saharanism lived and lives and travels through these entities. The Americans, for example, in the 1930s, shared their knowledge about the Dust Bowl. British and French colonial officers took some of the knowledge that was developed in the Soil Conservation Service in the United States, took it back to the Sahara, they took it back to the Gulf. There were, this expertise and knowledge then after the end of the colonial era was inherited by the UNESCO that takes up some of these experts, the British and the French experts who could not work anymore in the former colonies, moved to work for the UNESCO as experts. They worked within the arid zone programs that was started in 1951, and it mostly focused on the Middle East. And what's really fascinating is that there is a book, it's Richie Calder. The book is entitled "Man Against Desert," and it sold thousands of copies, and it was serialized and syndicated by a lot of newspapers in the 1950s and the 1960s. I think in the 1950s when it was his journey to visit different places. Yeah. So this is from Richie Calder's because his articles were serialized in different newspapers, and I don't remember. So 15,000 English schools incorporated the articles into their curricula. So all the wrong assumptions that Calder's develops in that book made it into British schools, and you can imagine how many students were studying in these 15,000 schools, and how many people were reading the newspapers in which the book was syndicated. And I think that this book did a lot of damage actually to the way people think and see deserts. And finally, I've talked a lot about like what's wrong with Saharanism, and I just want to finish here that there is a fascinating concept that I work with, and it's called وحدة المخلوقات or وحدة الكائنات, which is the unity of creatures. And for me, it's very important to not just succumb to what Saharanism is doing and how it's destroying deserts or how it has disseminated this imaginary of deserts as spaces that are available, empty, exploitable, inherently dangerous. I wanted to finish the book with a hopeful message that is grounded in the work of indigenous writers and thinkers and activists. And they base that on this notion of the unity of creatures. That is like the future of people in deserts is not and cannot be separated from the future and the existence of other creatures. And from there, I develop what I call a counter-Saharanism. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brahim. This is fascinating. So much, all of your scholarship and giving a name to Sahaраnism. Thank you. And so much food for thought. I'm gonna stop your sharing so we can
Yeah.
hear. So if people would like to put questions either into the chat or use the Q&A feature, we have a few questions coming into the Q&A feature. How could we promote geophysical international security by internationally governing the use of deserts as uses of Antarctica, where member state claims to ownership are suspended, and space? The use of deserts without the free, prior, and informed consent of peoples who pre-existed in states in order to develop uranium makes that particular desert locale uninhabitable, thus violating ICESCR Article 1, while preventing implementation of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification by increasing temperature in all deserts, also violating UN Charter. This also violates the UN Genocide Convention because uranium development exterminates peoples where safety protocols cannot be observed in rapidly increasing temperatures of the desert. Apart from radioactive and other toxic impacts, humans are not likely to survive the heat index alone in one generation. How is access to justice supported to bring forward physical, geophysical, meteorological, and natural science to prevent this genocide? And that's a long one. I don't know if you see that in the Q&A.
I can't see it, but I think that's the whole point. The point is for a very long time, there is a lot of amazing scholarship about deserts and that focuses on very specific aspects of deserts. But I think naming things like we have Orientalism, for example. We it's a very powerful work, and when you teach Orientalism to students, when you read Orientalism, you see it. It becomes very obvious when you know when somebody is making an Orientalist statement when they are talking about Muslims or Asians or when they are being racist when and but that work of finding Orientalism and knowing that's Orientalism took the work of Edward Said to be able to define and delineate what it is that constitutes Orientalism. Similarly, here, when we talk about deserts from a position of ambiguity and lack of conceptual understanding and material understanding of what's happening to them, we cannot really be able to change. But once we imagine deserts as other things than death, than danger, than solitude, that when we imagine them as sources of life and living organisms and places where actually people live and call homes, and how how this phenomenon of Saharism has turned them into something that they are not, then I think everything that you're asking in that question will be resolved. The last sentence I actually say in the book is that I invite people to think about deserts as seas and oceans because the exercise here is really very simple. If I come and tell you right now that there was an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, you would think that it's the end of life because you're thinking about the fisheries, you're thinking about all the the manners of life that exist in the ocean and which are going to be threatened by an oil spill. If I say that there was an oil spill in the Sahara or in some other desert, it's highly likely that you wouldn't care, not because you don't care, but the danger of the spill itself cannot be conceived or thought about in ways that are concrete. So once we imagine life differently and think about life as existing both at sea and in deserts, and that lives are equal, I think that's where that change will come. But we have to resist Saharism and how it cheapens one life and renders it inexistent so that we can actually move forward to ascertain the livelihood and the life of deserts.
Yeah, thank you. Um, we have
There
another
is a,
question. Sorry?
there is a question here that I can read. It says, when you began being curious about developing a language to talk about desertism, did you already know about all the nuclear testing in Algeria and the US, or did that come after? That's a great question. So, when I first thought about writing a book about deserts, I actually just wanted to write about the desert literature. So,
Mhm.
Ibrahim Al-Kuni, the person that I finished the book with, and there is an amazing Saudi writer, Abdul Rahman Munif, who wrote Mudun al-Milh, Cities of Salt. And Cities of Salt is about the proletarianization of the Bedouins after the discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf in general. And the book was banned. Munif was stripped of his citizenship. But Munif was this phenomenal writer. He was writing both fiction and nonfiction. He was a sociologist and an economist and a historian and all of that. And they just wanted to write about how the desert figures in their work. And I happened to be reading an anthropologist, an Australian anthropologist who wrote about returning back to Algeria after doing his research there in the 1960s. And he had this section on nuclear experimentation, and particularly how the indigenous people told him that after 40 years, some plants started returning to the Sahara after they were extinct due to experimentation. That's when I found out about the experimentation in the first place because nobody taught us this history. I grew up, I didn't know anything about it. And then I started looking into it. But the more research I did for the book, and I taught this class, I actually taught it as a class like 4 or 5 times. And then the more research I did, the more it became very clear to me that there is a conceptual void that I needed to deal with, but also instead of working on the Sahara alone or on the Arabian Peninsula, that a book in this field would actually speak to the state of deserts. That's
Mhm.
how I learned about the American Southwest and then the Soviets and Australia and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. We have the question, Mars is the ultimate desert. How does your analysis connect to the way Silicon Valley imagines an unlimited future of exploitation?
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's the name of the person who asked that question?
Roger Pete?
Okay, because I just wanted to make sure that that's not one of my friends because he published a very nice piece. We did a special issue, and we had a very nice contribution on Martian futures, I think, and about the efforts of the United Arab Emirates to colonize Mars and how there is like a very strong investment in harnessing knowledge about the desert and saying, well, we've domesticated the desert and we have expertise, and now we are going to take that expertise to Mars. And for me, I think thinking about Saharanism in terms of Mars, but also of this open-ended future, that's actually something that I'm very concerned about, like AI, like because if you think about data centers being placed in deserts, the return of nuclear energy, and the different ways in which people are thinking about creating smaller reactors, bringing back to life reactors that have been retired for years. So it's this open-ended future of economic growth, unbridled technological development, and the artificialization of intelligence and an open-ended future where law actually doesn't operate in the traditional way. For
Mhm.
me, that's actually what Saharanism means. It's just like you can do whatever you want as long as you get away with it. That's fine, and that's what happened with pedophilia in the Sahara. That's what happened with the with extraction. That's what happened with the burial of nuclear waste in deserts, and so on and so forth. So I think I'm of course I'm not a traditionalist. I'm not somebody who is like a passivist. That I no, I'm not. But at the same time, I think this opens up space for me to think about Sahaраnism and how to extend the my thinking about ethics and morality and law into futures of technologies that are actually not, that would like to survive in a world in which they escape law and ethics and all of that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So I have, I will lead it with an example. An elite curator described a working class friend's artwork as being about failure, the failure of companies to protect communities from contamination produced by a variety of manufacturing. But the artwork was clearly about sacrifice zones. The use of the word failure let elite power structures off the hook, as it was never their intention to protect people within these zones. Is there more you would like to elaborate upon as far as communicating across class with this sort of manipulation of terms?
Mm. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Uh, I think like a few weeks ago I was talking to a friend and I used the word like I was slippage. Uh, and this friend was like, no, that's not a slippage. That's like intentional. And I think that's also a very good reminder about the power of words and talking about failures. I definitely like, I think for me, Saharism is about something that's very intentional and very systematic and dehumanizing. And also, it's about turning nature against itself. Because for example, when you take the project of Mohammed bin Salman about like the Neom city in Saudi Arabia, uh, it's undeserting the desert. It's like as though the desert should not exist as a space.
Mhm.
And then while we think, I believe that deserts exist because they have an ecological importance and that they are so important for our survival as a humankind, but also for the survival of non-human subjects, that there is a complementarity between the existence of all these climates and spaces that's important for our sustainability in this world. So if I think in terms of like failure, that's just a misnomer. But I think what's happening here is that there is a production of certain ideas that allow certain people, certain entities, certain governments to act in ways that serve their interests or that, but at the cost of humans, but also at the cost of environment. So the question about class and about environment is really important. And I think if you think about most of the people who live in deserts, they are nomads, or they are people who are indigenous to these areas, who cannot leave, or who, for very, spiritual reasons, for livelihood reasons, for other reasons, stay in their homes. They don't have to be anywhere else, and they cannot be anywhere else. And sacrificing them through uh, turning their areas into zones of extraction or zones of experimentation or areas where law and order, the way we understand it in an organized society, doesn't apply. These are all imbricated into questions of class, of course. And if you think about the first that would be sacrificed in any situation is the poor and the working class, and that's just the way it is. So if you think about the the colonial period in North Africa, the people who were being exploited sexually and all of that, and in work and in dangerous tasks were poor people. They were not people who were educated or people who were attending college and so on and so forth. So for me, I think this idea of deserts as sacrifice zones should be I should add that sacrifice zones for the poor, the impoverished, and the indigenous mostly.
Mhm.
There is,
How do indigenous nomadic groups in Western Sahara play into this?
yeah, that's a great question. And Uh, you know, so just so that the terms are a little bit clear, Morocco annexed Western Sahara in 1975. Morocco actually was the country that brought the issue of Western Sahara to the United Nations in the 1950s as a decolonial issue because Morocco claimed that when Western Sahara was taken by Spain, it was part of the larger Morocco, portions of which were taken into different colonial powers. How does Saharanism apply to the area? I think for me, as I started, it doesn't matter who is engaging in Sahaраnism. It doesn't matter whether it's a state that rules over a desert. It doesn't matter if it's a foreign company. It doesn't matter if it's a domestic individual, as long as they engage in practices that don't see the desert or the Sahara or the desert as a place that commands respect, that commands environmental awareness, that commands respect of people and the livelihood and the existence that exists there. Saharanism applies to them. So I'm not trying to say it's Europeans or Americans or no. It's a matter of behavior and attitude towards desert. Anybody who engages in exploitative, extractive practices in any desert, whether it's in Morocco or in Egypt or in Argentina, the idea is that Saharanism is at work, and that's really what matters there. So
Mhm.
I'm not making exceptions there.
Yeah.
There is a question about the ism.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, some isms are empty and some are full. So I think what's really important here, Ragab, I mean, I know Ragab. What's really important here is does the ism hold some significance? Because, as academics, we work with words, we work with concepts, and I agree with you that sometimes we create words a lot, but at the same time, I think the test for any concept is whether it makes sense logically, whether it works, whether it adds an added value to the discussion. Does it bring attention to something that has been missed? Does it help us understand phenomena that help us carry knowledge forward or
Mm.
carry action forward in ways that are new and different. I think and it's not for me to decide, for example, whether Saharanism works or it doesn't work. It's up to the readers to kind of like decide, okay, I've been reading this. Does it make sense or it doesn't make sense, and so on and so forth. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. I think, what have you noticed, stories, information that have shifted your students' understandings of deserts as you've talked about these issues in your classes?
That's a wonderful question. And this is like it's called Saharan Imaginations. And it's one of my favorite classes to teach.
Mhm.
And I usually ask my students to write like a paragraph or two at the start of the semester before I open my mouth to say anything. I ask them to write a paragraph or two in which they inscribe what they know or learned about deserts or their expectations for the class. And I collect those papers and put them in an envelope. I don't read them and just keep them for the duration of the semester. On the last day of classes, I give them those papers and I tell them, okay, now reflect on where you started and where you ended. And they usually think, oh my God, I was so naive, or I was so, I didn't think about this. I didn't understand how complicated this was. I had no idea that there is all this theory and there are all these connections and there are these ways to think about deserts. And for me, that's the learning process, is that you're helping your students to move from like a situation of lack of knowledge or of like critical engagement, lack of critical engagement, to one in which you gain a complicated understanding of a question that you've been studying for 3 months.
Mhm.
And the results for me have been very satisfactory. And actually, in my acknowledgements of the book, I wrote about 4 or 5 students. I mentioned them by name because I appreciated the brilliance that they brought to these conversations, and it's very important. So I've noticed a lot of shifts, and sometimes even now, somebody would be in like New Mexico or Arizona that I haven't talked to like in 3, 4 years, and would write to me and say, "Hey, I was here and I remembered this conversation we had in class," you know? So for me, these are the deepest moments of teaching, is that what you teach in class is something that continues to shape how somebody thinks into the future, and it doesn't just end at the end of the semester.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Of course.